That she drove, what did she drive? No, she came home with Judy T. Lander, and she made some phone calls, and she kicked T. Lander out of her house at a certain time and all of this. And how does she know all of that? How does she know that? Well, because 6 months after the murders, she put together this timeline. 6 months later. So how was that helpful? And then there's T. Lander, and she's describing her drive up Bundy or around or near Bundy. And you know what's weird is that when you look at T. Lander's testimony, and you look at Harmon's testimony, and you look at Heistra's testimony, and you look at Pilneck's testimony, and you look at Aaronson's testimony, and you look at Mandel's testimony, all of these defense witnesses, and what you see, what you come away with is this. These people are all at Bundy at the same time. Basically, if you believe them, they are all basically on Bundy, at the intersection, or within view of 875 South Bundy. They're all there in this small area, basically at the same time. But when you talk to them, when they testify, they all tell you they didn't see any cars, they didn't see any people walking, they didn't see each other. Mutually exclusive. They mutually exclude each other. All of that testimony, they contradict themselves. They contradict themselves. And I'm not here to say these people are lying or whatever. They may just be mistaken. I don't know. But you have to evaluate their testimony, and I just think it's important that you take note of that. And I hope as well that you would take a look back at the timeline witnesses, if that's what we can call them, the ones that we called. Mark Storfer. He was concerned that the dog barking might wake his little boy, and so he told you what time it was. He looked directly at the clock, and he was interviewed the next day. The day after the murders. He knew what time it was when he heard the dog barking. Look back at Eva Stein. She lived in the condo directly above the walkway where the bodies were found. She lived right next door at 873 South Bundy. I believe her time was 10:20. Was it, Eva? Was it 10:20? It was 10:20. Those are the people you can rely on in terms of time. They're right there. They live there. They live right there near 875 South Bundy. So you've heard the defense and you've heard the prosecution case, and as I said before, you're going to have to make the decision in this case, and whatever decision you make, we'll live with. But after I finish talking to you today, the defense is going to talk to you, and I don't know who's going to talk to you or who's going to talk to you first. I would ask that you listen, and listen as attentively as you have listened to me, apparently. But I'm going to ask you as well that you keep in mind that as you listen to them, consider this. Hope, at least, that they can somehow extrapolate from all the evidence we've heard in this case where the defendant was at the time of the murders. If he ain't the murderer, where was he? And maybe they can tell you that based on the evidence in this case. And they put on a defense and bear in mind and insist, I think, if they can, explain to you what happened to O.J. Simpson's Aris Light 70263 gloves. The gloves found at the murder scene, the same style of gloves purchased by Nicole, the same style of gloves you see him wearing in that January 6, 1992 game photo. Where are his gloves? They called 58 witnesses. They called the maid, Gigi Garain. They called Miss Arnell Simpson. If he never owned a pair of those gloves, I don't recall the defense asking him if he owned a pair of those gloves. I don't recall the defense asking the maid, the woman who kept the closet, who put things up, who did the laundry. I don't recall them asking her if he owned a pair of gloves like that. Like the ones we found at Bundy, like the one we found behind his house. And I don't recall them asking the maid whether or not he owned a pair of Bruno Magli's. Insist that the defense explain to you who kills two people wearing $200 leisure shoes. If it ain't this man, if it isn't this defendant. Ask him to explain to you why the bloody shoe prints leading away from the bodies are size 12, his size. And where did all that blood come from? And why is it that when he spoke to Tom Lang, he told Tom Lang that the shoes he wore the night before were white Reeboks? They put on a defense, and you would expect that if the man that Alan Park saw entering the defendant's house that night was not the defendant, you would expect them to have called that man to tell you that, hey, it was me. It wasn't the defendant. Right? And if O.J. Simpson didn't create or cause those thumps on the wall behind Cato Kalin's house, then who did? This is the defendant's property. And when Kalin comes out with that flashlight, and when he finally sees the defendant sure doesn't seem too concerned about those thumps on the wall. I mean, Cato's frightened enough to grab a flashlight. He's frightened enough to tell the woman he's talking to on the phone that, hey, if I'm not back in 10 minutes, call the police. Worry about me. And words to that effect. But when he tells the defendant about these thumps on the wall, he isn't too concerned about it. He has West Tech security. We know that because the police talked to West Tech before they entered his house. Did the defendant call the police to say, hey, I may have a prowler on my property? Did he tell Cato to? Did he call West Tech, his private security, to come check this out? Did they? No. Why not? Because he knew. The defendant knew who caused the thumps on the wall. It was him. And why did he lie to Alan Park about being asleep? He wasn't asleep. And there are a variety of questions that you ought to insist be answered, that should be answered for you by the defense before you even consider acquitting this man of these very, very brutal crimes. The whole thing with the cut on his hand, what a fluke that is. You going to fall for that? They talk about cover-ups. That's a cover-up. That is a cover-up. A major, major question in all of this is what happened to that little black bag? Remember the bag on the driveway, at the driveway? The one that Cato offered to go get that night just before the defendant left for the airport? The defendant said, I'll get it. What happened to that bag? Has it been seen since? The defense well, we know that some of the luggage, apparently taken to Chicago by the defendant, was seized by retired Judge Delbert Wong. Remember? The Louis Vuitton bag? The one the defendant came back from Chicago with, the one he gave to Robert Kardashian. You saw it on tape. What happened to the little black bag? What happened to the contents of that Louis Vuitton bag? Remember? When you look at the tape, you see Kardashian standing there in front of the defendant's house. And you can tell that that bag is full. But when that bag comes to Delbert Wong, to Judge Wong, when it's pointed out to him, when it's seized by him months and months later, there's nothing in the bag. The bag is empty. What was in that bag? Ask him to explain to you why it is that if he didn't do it, why then is there a ton of evidence pointing to him and only to him? And ask him to explain to you, hey, if this is a rush to judgment, why then did the police go out to that house 8 times prior to 1989? Why didn't they ever arrest him? And if this is a rush to judgment, why did the police stand out in front of the house, in front of 875 South Bundy that night for a couple of hours doing nothing, as the defense has asserted, doing nothing but waiting for Van Adder and Lang? That's a rush to judgment. This is no rush to judgment. Unfortunately, this is just how things go. Those cops got out there to conduct a murder investigation, and that investigation led them to Rockingham. They followed the blood trail. Using your common sense, and when you evaluate all the evidence, you should do the same thing. Take a look at the crime scene and follow that blood trail. Because when you do, you're going to follow it right into his house, into his yard, into his bathroom, into his bedroom, right into his lap. And that blood trail went nowhere else. It didn't go anywhere else, and it didn't go to any other person. When I began this discussion with you last night, I talked to you about justice and what justice really means in this case. And it just means doing the right thing under the law. I mean, basically, that's all it means. Following his instructions. Just do what he tells you to do, the way he tells you to do it, and you'll be fine. And I've spent hours talking to you, and I've talked to you about the explosion, about that fuse, how the fuse gets shorter. We've explained to you that he had the opportunity and the means and the motive to do it, and that he did it. And we discussed a little bit about the smoke. We talked about the smoke that offenses put up. You have to find your way through the smoke. One of the first things they're going to tell you is that the prosecution's case lasted 6 months and ours lasted 2 months. They're going to tell you that. But you just keep in mind who was cross-examining those witnesses for days and days and days about minutia. About minutia. There was a lot of minutia in this case, and you know it was, because you didn't write it down. The defense got lost in minutia in their attempt to confuse you and to raise a reasonable doubt. Well, let me explain justice to you this way, and then I'll sit down and I'll be quiet. The people put on their case, the defense put on their case, and I assert that the defense case is a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It's all about distracting you from the real evidence in this case. So imagine the smoke, and imagine a burning house. Okay? Imagine that you're standing in front of a burning house, and from inside that burning house you can hear the wail of a baby, a baby's cry, a baby in fear, a baby about to lose its life. And you can hear that baby screaming. You can hear that wail. Now that baby's justice. This is baby justice. Now usually justice is a strong woman, but in this case justice is just a baby. And you hear that baby and you hear that wail and you see the smoke, you see the defense, there's all the smoke in front of you, and you feel a sense, you have a sense of justice. And you have a sense of what the law requires. And you have a strong commitment to justice and to the law, and you want to do the right thing. Well, justice is about to perish. Justice is about to be lost. Baby justice is about to be lost. And so you start to wade through that smoke, trying to get to that baby. You've got to save that baby. You have to save baby justice. And if you happen to run into some smoke, find your way through the smoke. And if you happen to run into a couple of defense attorneys along the way, just ask them to politely step aside and let you find your way through the smoke, because the smoke isn't over, okay? The smoke's about to get heavier because they're about to talk to you. Just use your common sense. Wade through the evidence, get down to the bottom line, and please, do the right thing. It has been an honor to appear before you, and we will wait for your verdict.
Thank you, Mr. Darden. All right, let me see counsel without the court report, please.